The night began like hundreds before it, under the cold hum of fluorescent lights, the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors marking time like a metronome of life and death. Inside Operating Room 6 at St. Matthew's Hospital in Boston, Dr. Michael Carter stood scrubbed in, his surgical mask concealing the calm focus that had become second nature after 20 years in the field. He was known among colleagues for his precision, a man who could rebuild what tragedy had stolen. But that night, as rain hammered against the high windows, something in the air felt off. It was supposed to be a standard reconstructive procedure, a multi-hour facial repair following a devastating car accident. The patient, 32-year-old Sarah Mitchell, had been brought in just hours earlier. Her face had absorbed the brunt of the collision, bones shattered, soft tissue torn, but miraculously she had survived with no internal bleeding or brain trauma. The team called her lucky. Michael didn't believe in luck, only preparation and science. As the procedure began, the atmosphere was almost serene. The anesthesia held steady. The nurses moved with practiced rhythm. Each incision, each suture was deliberate, controlled. Michael narrated to the residents as he worked, explaining the process of rebuilding a cheekbone using microplates and grafts. "You respect the face," he said. "It's where identity lives." Hours passed. The repair was nearly complete. Then something shifted, a flicker on the monitor, a hesitation in the heart rate. "Check the vitals," Michael said quickly. The anesthesiologist frowned. Numbers were dropping fast. Within seconds, the monitors erupted in shrill alarms. Heart rate, 0, flatline, start compressions. Michael's voice cut through the chaos. The OR filled with frantic movement, the sound of gloves slapping against skin, adrenaline pushing precision aside. Nurses counted aloud. Oxygen was forced into her lungs. Michael took over compressions himself, sweat beading under his mask. He'd been here before. Cardiac arrests, critical crashes. But this felt different. She was young, healthy. There was no medical reason for her heart to simply stop. Minutes dragged by. "We're at 5 minutes," someone said softly. Michael's hand slowed. The room grew still. "Time of death," the anesthesiologist murmured, voice barely audible. For a moment, there was only silence. The sterile quiet of loss. Michael stepped back, pulling off his gloves. His heart pounded in his ears. He stared at Sarah's still face, her features partially reconstructed, one side restored, the other shadowed in damage. "Why?" he whispered. A nurse gently covered her face with a sheet. The team began to clear instruments, moving slowly, reverently. Michael turned away, and that's when he heard it, a sound, faint, wet, like the inhale of someone surfacing from deep underwater. The nurse froze. The heart monitor, silent seconds ago, flickered. Sarah gasped. Her body arched violently upward. The sheet slipped from her face. Her eyes, wide, unfocused, then suddenly sharp, locked on Michael. No one moved. And then, in a voice dry and broken, she whispered, "Don't let him in." The room fell into stunned silence. The machines had come alive again, heart rate normalizing as if nothing had happened. The nurses stared in disbelief. Michael's hands trembled. He wanted to believe it was a reflex, a post-mortem spasm. But deep down, he knew what he had seen and heard. She wasn't just alive. She was terrified. That night marked the end of Michael's certainty in science, and the beginning of a haunting that would follow him for the rest of his life. Before that night became the story whispered about in hospital corridors. Sarah Mitchell was just another name on a chart, until she wasn't. To understand what happened in that operating room, we have to know who she was before everything shattered. Sarah was 32, a graphic designer from a small suburb outside Boston. Friends described her as luminous, the kind of person who made you feel like you mattered when she listened. She was married to Daniel Mitchell, a high school teacher, and they had a 5-year-old daughter, Emily. Their life was simple, unremarkable, and happy. Photos and home videos show her laughing, barefoot in the backyard, holding Emily up toward the sky as Daniel filmed. Her smile, warm, open, full of life, was the kind of thing that could light up a room. On a wet October evening, that light was nearly extinguished. Sarah had stayed late at work finishing a project. The rain came down hard, visibility low. A deer darted across the highway. She swerved, overcorrected, and slammed into the guardrail at 60 miles an hour. Paramedics would later say the impact looked unsurvivable, but somehow she did. When she arrived at St. Matthew's, her face was nearly unrecognizable. The orbital bones were crushed, the nasal structure destroyed. Several deep lacerations crossed her cheeks and forehead, but internally, she was stable. The ER doctors called it a miracle. That's when Dr. Michael Carter entered her story. A leading reconstructive plastic surgeon with years of experience in trauma cases, he reviewed her scans in silence. He could fix the damage. But as he studied the x-rays, he noticed something else, the wedding ring still on her swollen hand. "She has people waiting for her," he said quietly to his team. In his interview years later, Michael described why he took the case personally. People think plastic surgery is cosmetic, but for trauma patients, it's about restoration. You're not just rebuilding tissue. You're giving someone back their reflection, their identity. Over the next few days, the hospital became a second home to Daniel. He barely slept, sitting beside Sarah's bed, holding her hand through tubes and machines. Nurses remember him whispering to her, telling her stories about Emily, begging her to fight. Michael would visit each morning, checking her vitals, mapping out the complex reconstruction plan that could return her face and her life to what it once was. Everything about Sarah's case seemed textbook. Her recovery was steady, her organs strong, her spirit, though sedated, still present. Michael even told the family she'd likely make a full recovery. "This is one of the good ones," he said with quiet optimism. But beneath that promise lay something unspoken. In his eyes, there was hesitation, a flicker of unease he couldn't name. He didn't know why, but something about her case lingered with him. A feeling he couldn't shake, a whisper in his gut that this surgery would not end like the others. And as the days led to that fateful night in the operating room, the hospital's bright halls would soon become a stage for something no textbook could ever explain. The night of the surgery began like any other major operation, calm, methodical, the steady rhythm of a well-rehearsed team. Sarah had been prepped, anesthetized, and carefully positioned under the brilliant white glow of the OR lights. Monitors hummed quietly in the background, recording every beat of her heart, every breath from the ventilator. For hours, the team worked in perfect sync, guided by Dr. Michael Carter's steady voice and unshakable focus. He remembered later that it felt almost peaceful, the kind of precision only possible when science, skill, and trust align perfectly. Everything was going exactly as planned, Michael said in his interview years later. We'd repaired the left orbital rim, reinforced the jawline, stabilized her nasal bridge. Her vitals were flawless. But sometimes, peace is just the silence before something breaks. It happened in an instant. 1 second, the room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. The next, that sound stretched into a long, unbroken tone, flat. The monitor line froze into a single, piercing line of green. For a moment, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. "Check the leads," the anesthesiologist barked. "Compressions now." Michael's hands were already on her chest, pressing hard and fast. The nurse counted aloud, her voice shaking. 1, 2, 3, but the monitor didn't respond. The line stayed flat. Michael's eyes darted between the clock and the patient's pale face. "Epinephrine, 1 milligram, he shouted. Syringes moved like blurs. The defibrillator was charged, pads placed. "Clear!" Sarah's body jolted under the shock, but her heart didn't restart. The minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Michael had seen cardiac arrests before, but never one like this. There was no trauma, no blood loss, no identifiable cause. "It didn't make sense," he said later, his voice still trembling in memory. "We had control of everything. And then, suddenly, we didn't." At the 6-minute mark, the anesthesiologist looked at him. "We're past the window." Michael's hands slowed. The exhaustion hit him all at once. He'd done everything right. But still, the impossible had happened. The monitor remained silent. "Time of death," came the quiet voice. The room fell still. The sound of the ventilator faded. A nurse covered Sarah's face with a sterile sheet. The team began cleaning instruments in silence. Michael stood motionless, staring down at the covered body. For the first time in years, he felt helpless. He peeled off his gloves, his hands shaking. How do you explain a death with no cause? He whispered to no one in particular, and then it happened. A sound, faint, fragile, cut through the silence. It was small at first, like the gasp of someone surfacing from deep water. The nurse nearest the table froze. The heart monitor flickered. A weak blip appeared. Then another. Sarah's body convulsed, her back arching off the table. The sheet slipped from her face as she drew in a ragged breath. The nurses screamed. Michael stumbled back, his heart pounding in disbelief. Sarah's eyes flew open, wide, glassy, unfocused. Then they locked directly onto his. For a moment, no one in the room breathed, and then, in a voice that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her chest, she whispered 3 words that would haunt Michael for the rest of his life. "Don't let him in." Her vitals stabilized almost instantly. The monitor beeped in rhythm again. Her color returned. She was alive. But the look in her eyes wasn't relief. It was terror. Michael would later say, it wasn't a reflex. It wasn't some involuntary movement. She knew what she was saying. She was afraid. No one in that operating room ever forgot the sound of those words, soft, cracked, and full of dread. In the years that followed, some refused to speak about it at all. But for Michael, that whisper became an echo, one that followed him long after the lights of the OR went dark. In the days that followed, St. Matthew's Hospital became a place of quiet unease. Officially, Sarah Mitchell's case was labeled a spontaneous cardiac event with full recovery. But for the people in that operating room, those words felt hollow. A neat line of medical language that couldn't begin to explain what they had witnessed. Sarah survived. Physically, her recovery was remarkable. The reconstructive work had been successful, her vital signs steady. But emotionally, she was different. The cheerful woman her husband remembered seemed distant, hollowed out. Nurses noticed her staring off into empty corners, eyes wide, lips moving as if in silent conversation. Michael visited her room the morning after the surgery. She looked pale, her face framed in bandages and tubes, but her gaze was sharp, almost frantic. When she saw him, she grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "You brought me back," she whispered. "You shouldn't have." Michael froze. "Sarah, what do you mean?" Her eyes darted toward the doorway. He was waiting. "I saw him." He tried to steady his voice, rationalizing what he was hearing. Post-anesthesia delirium was common. Patients often experienced vivid dreams or hallucinations after surgery. But something about her tone unsettled him. It wasn't confused or drugged. It was certain. That afternoon, Michael found himself replaying the surgery in his mind, searching for explanations. Had her brain been deprived of oxygen too long? Could hypoxia have triggered a vivid hallucination? He asked for her EEG results. Normal. Cardiac enzymes? Normal. Neurological scan? Clear. There was nothing to explain what she'd said. Meanwhile, word of what happened spread quietly through the hospital. Nurses whispered about the flatline, about the way she came back gasping. One of them, a veteran with 20 years in trauma care, later told the documentary crew, "I've seen people die. I've seen them come close. But I've never seen anyone come back like that. Like she was running from something." At night, the staff began avoiding Sarah's room when they could. Some said they felt a cold draft when they walked past her door. One nurse claimed she heard whispers inside, even when Sarah was asleep. Others dismissed it as nerves. But the feeling lingered, a heaviness that settled in the air. Michael tried to focus on science, on his charts and scans, but something gnawed at him. He found himself checking on Sarah more often than necessary, drawn to her fear like a man standing too close to a storm. When he entered her room late one evening, she was awake, staring at the corner of the ceiling. "Do you see him too?" she asked quietly. Michael's breath caught. He turned toward the corner. Nothing, just shadows. He told himself it was stress, fatigue. But that night, as he drove home through the rain, Sarah's words replayed in his mind. "You brought me back. You shouldn't have." For the first time in his career, Michael Carter, a man of science, began to wonder if he'd crossed a line not even medicine was meant to touch. In the weeks after her surgery, Sarah's recovery should have been routine. Her wounds were healing. Her vital signs remained stable. By every measurable standard, she was improving. Yet Michael sensed something was deeply wrong. Her body was mending, but her mind seemed trapped somewhere else. When asked how she felt, Sarah would pause before answering, her gaze unfocused, as though listening to something no one else could hear. One morning, when Michael stopped by for his daily check, she spoke first. "I remember dying," she said. The words stopped him cold. He closed her chart slowly, unsure if she was lucid. "People often dream under anesthesia," he replied carefully. "Sometimes it feels real." Sarah shook her head. "It wasn't a dream." Her voice trembled. "I was above the table. I could see everything. You, the nurses, the clock. I heard you call the time of death." Michael said nothing. He had heard similar accounts before. Near-death experiences, vivid hallucinations described by patients who had briefly flatlined. But there was something unsettling about her precision. The way she recounted every detail of the room, where the instruments were placed, what song was faintly playing from the radio in the corner, she went on. Then everything went dark, but it wasn't empty. It was alive, like something was there, watching. Her breathing quickened. "I saw a man, standing just beyond the light. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel him looking at me. He told me I wasn't supposed to come back." Michael tried to reason gently. Sometimes our brains create images when deprived of oxygen. They mix fear and memory into something vivid. But she shook her head, eyes wet. "No, he was real. And when you brought me back, he came with me." That last line chilled Michael to his core. Over the next few days, Sarah's accounts grew more detailed. She spoke of hearing whispers in the dark when she closed her eyes, of seeing movement in reflections. Nurses reported her waking from sleep, screaming, repeating the same words, "Don't let him in." The medical team began documenting her symptoms as trauma-induced psychosis, a common defense against near-death trauma. Yet Michael couldn't shake his doubts. He reviewed her charts again and again. Nothing. No hypoxia, no medication error, no physiological reason for her experience. When the documentary crew later asked him what he believed, his answer was quiet, almost ashamed. "I wanted to believe it was just her mind trying to make sense of chaos. But there was something about her eyes. She looked like someone who had seen something she couldn't forget." Michael began to have his own disturbances. He'd wake in the middle of the night, convinced someone was standing at the end of his bed. Once, he thought he heard Sarah's voice whispering from the corner of his office, "You brought him here." He dismissed it as exhaustion, the side effects of long hours, stress, and a restless conscience. But the line between Sarah's fear and his own began to blur. He'd find himself glancing over his shoulder in empty corridors, feeling the temperature drop when he entered the OR where she had died. During one therapy session, recorded months later, Sarah spoke directly to him. "You don't believe me? But you felt it too, haven't you? Michael hesitated, then whispered, yes. That moment, captured in grainy footage, became one of the documentary's most haunting scenes. Two people united not by medicine, but by something unspoken. A shared fear neither could explain, and neither could escape. From that day on, Michael's life would no longer be defined by what he could heal, but by what he could not understand. Months passed, and the rhythm of hospital life continued. New patients, new faces, new emergencies. But for Dr. Michael Carter, nothing felt normal anymore. His world, once grounded in science and precision, was beginning to unravel. Sarah had undergone 2 more minor surgeries to refine her facial reconstruction. Each time, the medical procedures went flawlessly, and each time she woke up screaming, the words were always the same. He found me again. The nurses grew uneasy around her. Some refused to assist during her operations. One anesthesiologist even requested reassignment, claiming the energy in the operating room made her nauseous. Michael dismissed it publicly, but privately he understood what they meant. There was a weight that followed Sarah, an invisible heaviness that seemed to thicken the air wherever she went. He began to dread seeing her name on the surgical schedule, not out of fear for her condition, but fear of what might happen. I'd start sweating before I even scrubbed in, he said in an interview years later. I kept telling myself it was nonsense. But the human mind can only hold so much denial. At home, sleep became impossible. He'd wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced he heard footsteps in his hallway. Once, he found his bedroom light flickering, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. He told himself it was faulty wiring. He tried to believe it. Then came the night he broke. Michael was operating on another patient when the overhead lights flickered just for a moment. It was nothing unusual. Hospitals had backup generators for such things. But when the lights steadied, he froze. For a split second, he thought he saw a figure standing at the far end of the OR. Motionless, faceless, framed by the glow of monitors. He blinked and it was gone. He made it through the surgery, hands trembling. That night, he didn't drive home. He sat in his office, staring at the framed photo of his surgical team. On the edge of the image was a faint blur, a smudge that hadn't been there before. He told no one. But inside, something cracked. Sarah, meanwhile, had been transferred to a rehabilitation facility in Vermont. Her husband, Daniel, said she rarely slept, often muttering to herself, terrified of mirrors. She'd cover them with towels, he recalled. I said she didn't want to see him. Michael watched her case from afar, but couldn't let go. I started questioning everything, he said. Maybe I wasn't supposed to bring her back. Maybe there are rules we don't understand. He tried to bury himself in work, but the harder he tried, the more fragmented he became. He stopped teaching, stopped attending conferences. Colleagues whispered that he'd burned out. Another surgeon lost to stress, but the truth was quieter, sadder. Michael Carter wasn't losing faith in medicine. He was losing faith in what reality itself could explain. Years later, the man once known as one of Boston's best reconstructive surgeons now lives in quiet isolation. The camera opens on Dr. Michael Carter, sitting alone in his home office. Sunlight filters weakly through half-closed blinds, dust motes suspended in still air. His surgical degrees hang neatly on the wall, but the scalpel hands that once rebuilt, lives now tremble as he pours coffee into a chipped mug. The years have softened his voice, but his eyes still carry the weight of that night. When asked about Sarah Mitchell, his composure falters. He takes a long breath before speaking. I've operated on hundreds of patients. I've lost some, saved others, but she's the one I can't stop thinking about. He pauses, glancing toward the window as if expecting to see something there. 3 years after that surgery, I got a call. It was Daniel Mitchell. His voice grows quieter. Sarah had passed away in her sleep. Cardiac arrest, they said. No warning signs. No pain, just gone. The camera lingers on his expression, not just grief, but guilt. When I heard, I sat in my car for an hour. I couldn't move. It felt like I'd failed her, or maybe like something finally caught up to her. Daniel later tells the documentary crew that Sarah's final months were peaceful but strange. She seemed lighter, like she was finally ready to let go. But some nights, I'd wake up and she'd be sitting up in bed, staring at the doorway. She'd whisper, "He's here again," and then she'd go back to sleep. Michael's narration continues softly. After her death, I started dreaming about her. Always the same dream. She's standing in the OR, her bandages gone, her face whole again. She looks at me and says, "Don't let him in." Then she disappears. I wake up shaking every time. He rubs his eyes, forcing a weary smile. You'd think after all this time I'd have an explanation. Oxygen deprivation, electrical impulses, a neurological misfire, something. But I don't. The truth is, I don't know what we brought back that night. The documentary transitions to silent hospital corridors, dimly lit, echoing with the hum of distant machines. A narrator's voice overlays the imagery. Medicine teaches us that life and death are measurable, that a heartbeat defines existence. But sometimes, what happens between those beats can't be measured at all. Michael returns for one final interview. He looks straight into the camera, eyes glassy but resolute. People think being a doctor means understanding life, but after that night, I realized maybe we're just witnesses. We fix the body, but we don't touch the soul. That's something else entirely. He leans back, his voice a whisper. That case made me realize something I wish I didn't know. Some doors shouldn't be opened. The screen fades to black. The faint echo of a heart monitor beeping, slow, steady, fades into silence. And in that silence, the audience is left with one chilling question. What if death isn't the end, but an invitation?